Morning, everyone. So today we are picking up our story here, part 10, Bible in a Year. Last week we finished up the book of Leviticus and we did kind of an introduction to Numbers, and worth just kind of jumping back in here to look starting in chapter 1 in a little more depth. So we will work through chapters 1 through 13 today. So going ahead and just start right at the beginning, Numbers chapter 1. Here's verses 1 through 4. The Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting in the desert of Sinai on the first day of the second month of the second year after the Israelites came out of Egypt. He said, "Take a census of the whole Israelite community by their clans and families, listing every man by name one by one. You and Aaron are to count according to their divisions all the men in Israel who are 20 years old or more and able to serve in the army. One man from each tribe, each of them the head of his family, is to help you." So our story picks up, it says in verse 1, on the first day of the second month of the second year after they were led out of Egypt. This is probably about 13 months after they cross the Red Sea on dry land. God commands Moses to take a census of Israel, and it says by clans and families. And this is interesting. This is probably something worth noting. Normally, when we think about Israel and the organization of Israel, we're used to seeing it broken down into the 12 different tribes. And here it's doing that, but we're also seeing two rungs down in the hierarchy here. So we have Israel at the top of the hierarchy, and below that we have the 12 tribes, and underneath each tribe we have clans. And clans were just extended family lines. It was usually named after and started with the grandson or the great-grandson of the son of Jacob that the tribe was named after. Right? So you have Jacob, and we have the 12 tribes under him. Each of those men, you go 2-3 generations down from that, and usually that was where you got your clan. Then under each clan, we have different families, and that would be families by the family patriarch, and it would include sons and grandsons, and sometimes everybody else in the household as well. So the census is being taken at the family level, and this is pretty granular. And this is what God told Moses to do. And God tells him to appoint from each tribe somebody to help him take the census. And God tells him who to choose. And Numbers chapter 1 gives us a summary of all of that. It doesn't give us the count by clan and at the family level too, but it does say the census was taken this way. And it gives us totals from each tribe. And it says that the total amount counted in this census was 603,550 people. But as we noted last week, that number includes military-age males only. This does not include women and children and old men, and it didn't include the Levites either. Skip to verse 48, still of chapter 1. The Lord had said to Moses, "You must not count the tribe of Levi or include them in the census or the other Israelites. Instead, appoint the Levites to be in charge of the tabernacle of the covenant law, over all its furnishings and everything belonging to it. They are to carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings. They are to take care of it and encamp around it. Whenever the tabernacle is on the move, the Levites are to take it down, and whenever the tabernacle is to be set up, the Levites shall do it. Anyone else who approaches it is to be put to death. The Israelites are to set up their tents by divisions, each of them with their own camp under their own standards. The Levites, however, are to set up their tents around the tabernacle of the covenant law so that my wrath will not fall on the Israelite community. The Levites are to be responsible for the care of the tabernacle of the covenant law." All right, so here we see a formalization of the Levites being set aside for special service to God. And as you guys know, we've been following along here, this isn't the first time it comes up. This goes all the way back to Exodus chapter 32 with the golden calf incident. Verses 25 through 29 of that chapter, Moses saw the people were running wild, so he stood at the entrance to the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, "You have been set apart today, or for the Lord today, for you are against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." All right? Tremendous thing that had just happened in Exodus 32. Moses is up on the mountain receiving the commandments from God, and Moses ain't gone too long, and the people, what do? They start making idols and saying, these are the gods that led you out of Egypt and did all these things for you. And so God says, you need to go back down the mountain and deal with this. And who comes to Moses' side to help with that but the Levites? Now, in all fairness, Moses himself is a Levite, so it's maybe not a huge surprise that it was the Levites who rallied to him when all this happened, but apparently this was still a really big deal that they did this. And so Moses makes the comment to them, because you stood up for the Lord, even against your own family members and friends, God is setting you apart for a purpose that is different from the others. And in Exodus 28, verse 1, we also see Aaron and his sons get set aside to become priests. That verse says, "Have Aaron your brother brought to you from among the Israelites, along with his sons Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar, so they may serve me as priests." So, put all this together, we see the Levites here get set aside for special service to God. And then Aaron and his sons, all Levites, they get set aside for something even more special. They become the first priests. And so here we need to make a differentiation that's important going forward. Aaron is a Levite. All priests going forward under the Old Covenant were to be descendants of Aaron specifically. And I think the Jews stuck to this. So understand this. All priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests. So the descendants of Aaron, Levites, they would become the priests, and the rest of the Levites would serve in non-priestly roles supporting the priests. And so here in Numbers chapter 1, verses 48 through 53 that we just read, we see that role starting to get defined. It starts to get legs here. They're going to encamp around the tabernacle. And when the tabernacle moves, it's going to be the Levites who do the moving. And we'll see the logistics and the details of those get defined a little bit more today as we keep working through the text. Chapter 2, here's verses 1 and 2. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "The Israelites are to camp around the tent of meeting, some distance from it, each of them under their standard and holding the banners of their family." So this chapter explains how God wanted the camps to be physically laid out. And this chapter goes on to work through the logistics of this very specifically, and it includes some numbers as well. But essentially, it would have looked something like this. Hopefully the words are big enough for you to be able to see on our screen here. In the middle, we had the tabernacle. The ark would be in there. And then camped all around the tabernacle, it's the Levites. And we see here on the screen, it doesn't just say the Levites. The Levites are actually broken out by clan. We'll see this explained in chapter 3. But then around the whole perimeter here, we've got the 12 different tribes of Israel. And like we saw before with the land promise, we've got 12 tribes around the perimeter, but the Levites are in the middle, so we really only have 11 tribes left, right? But if you look at the lower left portion of the diagram there, we see Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, broken out as if they were their own tribes. We talked about this before. This ties back to that story at the end of Genesis where Jacob gives the blessing and Joseph winds up getting the double portion. But literally, this would be how the camp would be laid out. Numbers chapter 3, the beginning of that chapter, we see a reiteration and maybe a slight expansion of chapter 1, where it talks about the Levites being set apart. Then skip down to verse 17. These were the names of the sons of Levi: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. So this is important, right? With the Levites, we see the tribe get broken down into groups of clans. And this is going to be very important because these groups of clans are going to be assigned different roles in how they're supporting God. The first one that gets mentioned here are the Gershonites, verse 23. The Gershonite clans were to camp on the west behind the tabernacle. You guys saw that on the screen a moment ago. Skip to verse 25. At the tent of meeting, the Gershonites were responsible for the care of the tabernacle and tent, its coverings, the curtain at the entrance to the tent of meeting, the curtains of the courtyard, the curtains at the entrance of the courtyard surrounding the tabernacle and altar, and the ropes and everything related to their use. So here we're starting to see some very specific roles being assigned. Israel is going to be nomadic for quite a while, and the Gershonites get assigned essentially the curtains and the ropes of everything that were to be moved around. And these weren't like kitchen drapes here. These would have been heavy, big curtains. This would have been a lot of work, but they were put in charge of that. Second, we see the Kohathites. Second part of verse 28, the Kohathites were responsible for the care of the sanctuary. The Kohathite clans were to camp on the south side of the tabernacle. Again, we saw that on the diagram a moment ago. Verse 31, they were responsible for the care of the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, the articles of the sanctuary used in ministering the curtain, and everything related to their use. So the Kohathites were responsible for the ark and for all the particulars in the sanctuary. And that leaves us with one more group of clans, the Merarites. Verses 36 and 37 talks about them. The Merarites were appointed to take care of the frames of the tabernacle, its crossbars, posts, bases, all its equipment, and everything related to their use, as well as the posts of the surrounding courtyard with their bases, tent pegs, and ropes. So it looks like the Merarites were responsible for handling the heavy infrastructure of the tabernacle, the beams, the posts, and all of those things. I'm sure that was a tremendous amount of labor. And then we have the rest of the Levites mentioned here in verse 38, Moses, Aaron, and his sons. Moses and Aaron and his sons were to camp to the east of the tabernacle toward the sunrise in front of the tent of meeting. They were responsible for the care of the sanctuary on behalf of the Israelites. Anyone else who approached the sanctuary was to be put to death. So now we've got the layout, we've got the explanation of what the Levites were doing in a grouping of clans basis. Numbers chapter 4. Here we start to get a deeper dive into the clans of Levi, the Levites, right? And we were just talking about the segregation of duties that they were assigned to the four branches, the Kohathites, the Gershonites, the Merarites, and then Moses and Aaron, of course, and his sons. And here in chapter 4, we see a little bit more of the segregation of duties. I don't think there's anything groundbreaking for us to look at in chapter 4. It's really just a reiteration and expansion of chapter 3, and they get numbered. There's some interesting stuff in here, but we can move on. Chapter 5, maybe a little more interesting to talk about today. The beginning of chapter 5, here's verses 1 through 4. The Lord said to Moses, "Command the Israelites to send away from the camp anyone who has a defiling skin disease or a discharge of any kind, or who is ceremonially unclean because of a dead body. Send away male and female alike. Send them outside the camp, so they will not defile the camp where I dwell among them." The Israelites did so. They sent them outside the camp. They did just as the Lord had instructed Moses. So just in case you thought last week we were done with all the gross parts of the law, no, it continues. We get a little bit more here today, but the important thing that we're learning here, we're reminded of this principle last week we talked about, and that is the purity of that camp needed to be maintained. The reason is we have the manifestation of God's glory, the Shekinah glory of God, that pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, dwelling directly with people in the camp. And because of that, those things that symbolize sin and decay, they're not allowed to be in there because God is there. So if you found yourself ritualistically unclean for some reason, you had to leave the camp until such time as you could be cleansed and you could come back in. And that leads us to the bulk of chapter 5 here, which is a test for an unfaithful wife. And this one is a big one, and I want to spend some time on this here this morning because this is one of those passages where people who want to attack the Bible, even though they don't believe in God, all of a sudden they become Bible experts, and they like to trot this passage out and make a thing of it. So let's look at this, and then we'll talk about it, because if you hear about anything in our world today about Numbers, this is probably a big part of it. I'm going to read a long stretch here, chapter 5, verses 11 through 28. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him, so that another man has sexual relations with her, and this is hidden from her husband, and her impurity is undetected, since there is no witness against her and she has not been caught in the act, and if feelings of jealousy come over her husband and he suspects his wife and she is impure, or if he is jealous and suspects her even though she is not impure, then he is to take his wife to the priest. He must also take an offering of 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour on her behalf. He must not pour olive oil on it or put incense on it, because it is a grain offering for jealousy, a reminder offering to draw attention to wrongdoing. The priest shall bring her and have her stand before the Lord. Then he shall take some holy water in a clay jar and put some dust from the tabernacle floor into the water. After the priest has had the woman stand before the Lord, he shall loosen her hair and place in her hands the reminder offering, the grain offering for jealousy, while he himself holds the bitter water that brings a curse. Then the priest shall put the woman under oath and say to her, if no other man has had sexual relations with you and you have not gone astray and become impure while married to your husband, may this bitter water that brings a curse not harm you. But if you have gone astray while married to your husband and you have made yourself impure by having sexual relations with a man other than your husband, here the priest is to put the woman under his curse. May the Lord curse you to become a curse among your people when he makes your womb miscarry and your abdomen swell. May this water that brings a curse enter your body so that your abdomen swells or your womb miscarries. Then the woman is to say, Amen, so be it. The priest is to write these curses on a scroll and then wash them off into the bitter water. He shall make the woman drink the bitter water that brings a curse, and this water that brings a curse causes bitter suffering will enter her. The priest is to take from her hands the grain offering for jealousy, wave it before the Lord, and bring it to the altar. The priest is then to take a handful of the grain offering as a memorial, offering and burning it on the altar. After that, he is to have the woman drink the water. If she has made herself impure and been unfaithful to her husband, this will be the result. When she is made to drink the water that brings a curse and causes bitter suffering, it will enter her, her abdomen will swell, and her womb will miscarry, and she will become a curse. If, however, the woman has not made herself impure but is clean, she will be cleared of guilt and will be able to have children. All right, long stretch, but appreciate you bearing with me. Very social hot button topic, this passage, so I wanted to read the whole thing. Like we said, this has come under a lot of fire in recent years, and there's two big accusations that people like to make about this passage. The first one is the biggest one. Pro-choice people like to point at this and say, this is God-sanctioned abortion here. Right? We've got God telling a priest, this argument is, we have God telling a priest to administer this bitter water to a woman, and that will cause her to miscarry. They say, see, this is abortion being administered right here in the Bible, and not only is God okay with it, he's the one commanding people to do it. That's the first accusation we get. The second one is people say, yep, this is just another example of the patriarchy oppressing women. This is insecure men who are now able to institutionally persecute women whenever they want to, just because they're jealous or for any other reason they may choose. And look, as always, neither of these arguments are correct at all. We will work through both of them, but we'll look at the abortion argument first, and then we'll talk about the second one after that. So short answer, this is not an abortion we are looking at here. We should be able to leave it at that, but it's probably worth unpacking here because I'm sure you guys have heard this before, and if you haven't, you will. There's a couple of good reasons why we can say this is definitely not an abortion that's being pictured here. One is a matter of logic, and the other is a matter of translation. We'll go with the translation angle first. The problem here, part of the problem comes from an unfortunate translation in the NIV. And I had somebody mention to me, Pastor, you always talk about stuff wrong with the NIV. Why do you preach from it? The reason why we talk about translation issues from the NIV is because I preach from the NIV, right? If I was preaching from any of the other ones, you'd hear more about the issues from the other translation. Overall, NIV is a fantastic translation. This is one of those times where it can cause some issues. So here you go. Verse 27, the woman drinks the bitter water. It says, if she has made herself impure and been unfaithful to her husband, this will be the result. When I'm made to drink the water that brings a curse and causes bitter suffering, it will enter her. Her abdomen will swell, this is the part, and her womb will miscarry, and she will become a curse. All right? This wording echoes wording from earlier in the chapter as well. But the translation here shows the consequences. If she is guilty, it says the woman's abdomen will swell and her womb will miscarry. And technically, the Hebrew could mean that, but it can also mean a lot of other things too. Literally in the Hebrew, it says the bitter water will enter her, and her belly or internal organs will swell up or distend and collapse or become inferior. So our NIV mentions two parts of the body, abdomen and womb, but the Hebrew just mentions the one part, right? It just mentions the belly or internal organs. And yes, the womb could be a part of that, but it can mean other parts. It usually means other parts, this word, when it's mentioned in the Bible. In Genesis 32:25, when Jacob is wrestling with the angel and the angel touched his hip and it popped it out of joint, that part of Jacob that got damaged, that's the same Hebrew word that we see in Numbers chapter 5 here. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't Jacob's womb that got dislodged in that wrestling match, right? So, second part, her belly would swell and fall. I guess that could mean miscarry, but I don't see why that's attractive here. And here's where I think the other translations do a better job. If you're following along in the New American Standard, you will see it says, her abdomen will swell and her thigh will waste away. The King James, her belly shall swell and her thigh shall rot. It makes a lot more sense for Numbers 5 to just be saying that if the woman was guilty, God would cause her belly to swell, so there would be a visual confirmation of her guilt. And really, this almost has to be the case, because remember what this test is for. It says, if the husband suspects his wife of cheating and there is no evidence, it said in the beginning. Nothing here says she's pregnant, right? She could be, but nothing here says that she's pregnant. And if she isn't pregnant, then it wouldn't make any sense at all for the judgment to be for her to miscarry, because you can't miscarry if you're not pregnant, right? I think that's pretty clear. Although today in 2026, somebody would probably say, well, of course you can miscarry if you're not pregnant, and men can breastfeed and all this, right? But logically, this just does not work. So this is not a passage about God getting rid of a baby in the womb. And even if this judgment did result in a miscarriage, because I suppose it could, there is a world of difference between this thing and an abortion. Follow me on this. If the woman was found guilty of adultery, the result is she's probably going to be stoned to death after this, right? Because that was the penalty for adultery at that time. So there's no convenience here at all about aborting a child. And two, when a woman goes to an abortion clinic today to have that procedure done, what happens? The medical team intentionally interacts with the baby and kills it, right? Not trying to be crass. That's literally what happened. That's the whole point. The entire purpose of the medical team's action is to cause death to that baby. They directly do that. But in the case of Numbers chapter 5, the priest doesn't do that, right? What did it say the priest did? He just mixes up some dust in a glass of water and he tells the woman to drink it, right? She just drinks a glass of dusty water and that is it. Understand this. Apart from God's judgment, that is a totally benign thing. Once the service is done, if we wanted to, we could all go downstairs and we could all drink a glass of water like this. And maybe despite having some kind of disgusting taste left in our mouths when it's done, it wouldn't hurt any of us. The only harm that could come to a woman during this thing was directly from God's judgment. This is not abortion pictured in the Bible, okay? Second, let's address the idea, this is the patriarchy oppressing women. Here's the Bible allowing men to persecute their wives at will, and there's nothing they can do about it. But unfortunately, this accusation too, is a perversion of what's going on. This law doesn't actually degrade women. It was put into place to protect them. Think about this. If there was a problem where a man was habitually jealous of his wife and he was constantly accusing her of cheating on him, and again, the penalty for this is death, right? If she was innocent of that, what protection did the woman have before this law? This sort of thing could lead to physical abuse or the man publicly shaming his wife. All kinds of bad things can happen as the result of a irrationally jealous husband. But now, with this law in place, the whole point is the woman is protected. If she really didn't do anything wrong and the man insists that they go through the process, then very publicly the woman's innocence becomes made known to everybody, right? Everyone sees it, right? Her virtue is upheld publicly. And so the whole point of this is it protects her if she's innocent. I guess if she's guilty, it does not protect her there. But even then, this law is not sexist because the Bible says in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10, and Deuteronomy 22:22, that the punishment for adultery is death for both the woman and the man who were involved. And let me tell you, if a man were to put his wife through this process and the wife is to be found guilty, I guarantee you that the man that she slept with would be the very next person on trial, and it would not end well for him either. Numbers chapter 5. If you still struggle with this or are concerned about it, talk to me. I know this is a big point of contention in our society today, but as usual, if you just read the Bible naturally and don't bring to the table any baggage that our society is trying to put in your head, it's very logical and actually merciful. All right, chapter 6, here's verses 1 through 5. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of dedication to the Lord as a Nazirite, they must abstain from wine and other fermented drink, and must not drink vinegar made from wine or other fermented drink." Verse 5, during the entire period of their Nazirite vow, no razor may be used on their head. They must be holy until the period of their dedication to the Lord is over. They must let their hair grow long. So most of chapter 6 is talking about the Nazirites and all that's involved with them. It's a little unusual, pretty interesting. I think we'll probably cover this a little bit more in the midweek, who they are and what all was involved with that. Chapter 7, tabernacle at this point is all set up. And we see here in this chapter that everything had to be anointed and consecrated before it was used. And we see that God had the tribes kind of kick in and give 6 carts and 12 oxen to move all of this stuff around. And it says that Moses gave 2 carts and 4 oxen to the Gershonites. If you guys remember, we just talked about back in chapter 4, the Gershonites were the ones who were responsible for moving all the ropes and curtains. And so they got 2 carts to load all that stuff into and an oxen to pull that. And it says he gave 4 carts, the remaining 4 carts to the Merarites. And if you remember, those are the guys who had to move all those heavy beams and posts and all the big infrastructure parts. So they had 4 carts and 8 oxen assigned to them. I don't know how big these carts were, but they must have been pretty robust to be able to carry all that. And that makes sense, right? Because moving all this stuff, big job. 6 carts, 12 oxen, and it says that the Kohathites, they were the ones who were responsible for carrying the ark, all the fixtures, right? They didn't get any carts or anything like that at all. The Bible said they had to carry the stuff, those things on their shoulders. So they kind of had the lighter things to move around, but they didn't have the benefit of the carts. So I guess you're born into whichever clan you're born into, but I'm sure there was all kinds of comparing about who had the harder job and all of that. So if you've ever wondered about, well, how does this stuff get moved around logistically, right? Because you can't run up and touch any of these things or you'd be struck dead. Well, we work through all of this. And Numbers, the book of Numbers, gives us the answer about how these things got moved around. Most of the Levite clans were dedicated to doing just this. And they had carts and they had oxen to help them with the heavy parts. So again, we're in chapter 7, and here's verses 10 through 11. When the altar was anointed, the leaders brought their offerings for its dedication and presented them before the altar. For the Lord had said to Moses, each day one leader is to bring his offering for the dedication of the altar. So this section is going to detail out all those things that each tribe brings in for the dedication, and it is very specific by tribe. But I'm sure you guys noticed as you were doing your reading this week that it lists out what each tribe brought to the letter, but it also says or shows us that all tribes brought the exact same stuff. Right? The offering was the same for each tribe. 1 silver plate, 130 shekels. 1 silver basin weighing 70 shekels, both filled with fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering. There was 1 gold dish worth 10 shekels, filled with incense. For burnt offerings, they all brought 1 young bull, 1 ram, 1 male lamb a year old. For the sin offering, 1 male goat. For peace offerings, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 male goats, and 5 male lambs a year old. Kind of interesting. For some reason, Kevin can tell you this from memory, what they all brought. We can see all they brought. It's very repetitive, though. It lists out every single tribe, and it details the very same offering for each of them. And that repetition makes this the longest chapter in the book of Numbers. So we always say, the Bible isn't really that big of a book. I mean, for God to put in the entire history of the universe from start to finish, everything that we need to know about who he is, who we are, what our problem with sin is, how we deal with that, and the history of the church, and all that gets put in this book, right? It's remarkably dense what's in here. There's still only so many pages, and so God doesn't waste space in the Bible. And so when you see repetition in the Bible, don't just pass over it. God's trying to drive home a point. And so it's kind of worth thinking about why here God would include all of this information in such a repetitive manner. And I'll give you a few reasons here that it's a speculation, but I think it works. First, this emphasizes equality and unity among the tribes, right? It's by requiring identical offerings for each of the tribes, when these tribes were not of equal size or of equal wealth or of equal prominence, but they all contribute equally, right? And so it emphasizes equality and unity among the tribes. And so in the face of all these distinctives of man, right, who's the biggest, who's the richest, we see in this section that they all have an equal stake, an equal role in God's plan. And this equality isn't just mentioned once, it gets repeated 12 times. I'm sure there's a lesson here for us as well in this. Repetition also allows each tribe to honor God individually and be recorded for doing that. Each tribe has their day. And so really, this whole section, this whole chapter reads like a ceremonial roll call. And it shows complete and unanimous allegiance to God. No tribe gets summarized. No tribe gets left out. And really, it adds ceremonial weight too. Right? By repeating this same thing 12 times, it's exactly how it played out in reality. 1 tribe each day did this, so the same thing happened 12 times. By God repeating it like this in the Bible, we get a much better appreciation of this 12-day process of dedicating the tabernacle. But also, kind of personally, we notice here that no faithful contribution goes unnoticed by God. This is a big deal, what the tribes were doing. God is the focus of all of it, but every single tribe gets specific credit for what happened. And I think it's the same way with us. The focus of everything we do should always be God, but God, as he sees this stuff play out, he doesn't summarize and group all of our contributions. He recognizes what every individual does, and that's a blessing. It's one of the lessons that we learn from Numbers chapter 7, this very long and repetitive chapter. Chapter 8, we see Aaron is instructed to light the 7 lamps of the menorah so they illuminate forward. The Levites undergo a purification ritual. There is a sprinkling with water, shaving, washing of clothes, and offerings, both sin and burnt offerings. The people lay hands on the Levites, who are presented as a wave offering and dedicated to God in place of the firstborn. That's something we worked through a couple of weeks back. We'll probably hit that again in the midweek this week. We also see here that Levites serve in the roles that were outlined before from ages 25 to 50. Although beyond 50, they were still allowed to do some things. It was just a lighter duty, which at my advancing age, I would appreciate. Chapter 9, we have Israel keeping the second Passover in the wilderness on the appointed day, the 14th of the first month, right? They're told you got to do this every year. Here we see it's year 2. They're doing what they're supposed to do. It's also interesting, there's a provision made for an alternate day of Passover, like a Passover rain day. If you were unclean for Passover or you were traveling such that you couldn't participate, but the law required you did, no problem. It gives a day, here's the alternate date for the Passover. You would need to celebrate it then. If you ask the question, well, what happens if you're ceremonially unclean the second time? I don't know. But this would certainly serve a majority of the cases. And then we see the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night rest over the tabernacle, the Shekinah glory of God, the physical manifestation of God's glory. It says, going forward, here's how this is going to work. When it lifts up, it's hovering over the ark, right? When it lifts up, the people are supposed to march, and when it settles, they camp. And what we're seeing here is God's direct guidance of the nation here. And I wanted to go a lot more into this, but quite frankly, the more I dug into it, some of it gets really, really confusing with the information we were given. I was talking to Craig about one aspect of that before the service. If we can make enough of it before Wednesday, we'll go through this midweek, but it's interesting how they moved and followed the Shekinah glory of God, and it's probably not the way that you think it happened. Chapter 10, 2 silver trumpets are made, and these trumpets are supposed to be used, and they do get used, to signal for things in the assembly. They would blow the trumpets when it was time to break camp. They were used for alarms in the time of war. They were used for certain purposes in the festivals, stuff like that. Then on the 20th day of the second month of the second year of the Exodus, the cloud lifts, and Israel sets out from Sinai after nearly a year there. And the marching order gets detailed here. Tribe by tribe, it lists them off. Judah is in the lead, lists out the other tribes and where they are. But we've got the Levites, the Gershonites, Merarites, Kohites, Aaron, Moses, and Aaron's sons. All of them, bringing the tabernacle and the ark. They're right in the middle of the formation. On several occasions, though, special occasions, it looks like the ark is moved forward and the people of Israel follow the ark at the head of the procession. Again, midweek, we'll work through that. Moses also invites his brother-in-law, Hobab, Jethro's son, to join as a guide. And then Numbers 11, the people complain about hardships, right? And they're complaining and complaining. God has just delivered them miraculously from slavery in Egypt and is feeding them miraculously and sustaining them. And they start complaining. And as a result of that, fire from the Lord then starts to rain down and starts burning the outskirts of the camp until Moses intercedes. The people crave meat and they whine and they start waxing poetic about how great they had it in Egypt, which of course they didn't. Moses gets overwhelmed and he complains to God. And then God hears the people whining about having a lack of meat, and he provides quail in an abundance, but it's an abundance. He says, okay, you guys want meat? I'll give you meat. I'm going to give you so much meat, you're going to be swimming in it. It's going to be coming out your nose. You're going to get so sick of meat, but here you go. He does that. He gives them quail to eat, but he also brings along with it a plague as judgment. And then at the response to Moses whining to God about the people whining to him about God, God also causes the Holy Spirit to indwell 70 of the elders to help Moses share the leadership burden, which I'm sure was a tremendous blessing to him. Then Numbers 12, we have the story of Miriam and Aaron criticizing Moses for marrying a Cushite woman, and they start to question whether God speaks only through him. God affirms Moses' unique faithfulness and speaks to him face to face, winds up punishing Miriam for this with leprosy. Aaron pleads for mercy. Moses intercedes yet again. Seems like that is a giant part of his ministry, interceding for the people. God listens to him. Miriam is healed after 7 days outside the camp. And then that brings us to Numbers 13. So at God's command in Numbers 13, Moses sends out 12 leaders, one per tribe, plus Caleb and Joshua. They go out to spy on Canaan for 40 days. And when they come back, they bring back huge fruit, really evidence that the land is fertile. They describe all these fortified cities that they've seen, and they say the land is filled with these giants, these Anakim, and caused all kinds of fear. Caleb, in faith, immediately says, let's go ahead and conquest. Let's take this land. God is with us. God has told us to do this. But the other 10 spies give this negative, discouraging report, terrifying the people. It just went from person to person, poisoning them to the idea of moving into the promised land. And there's going to be some tremendous impact from all of this. We don't have time to get into that this morning, so we'll go ahead and close out here. But Lord willing, next week we'll meet together again. We'll pick up with this part of the story, people talking about moving into the promised land and all the impacts of this reconnaissance mission. It's a good story. It'll continue, Lord willing, like we said, next week. Would you bow with me in prayer? Dear God, we thank you very, very much again for this time together today to work through and study your word. We thank you so much for giving us the Bible, and we thank you for all that you have preserved for us that we may learn. And God, as always, we ask that if I have made any mistakes in what I've presented, you would bring those things to light so no one will be led astray. But Father, the things that we have talked about that are true and in accordance with your word, Lord, please give us wisdom from these things so we can become better sons and daughters to you as a result. Thank you so much, God, for this time today. Thank you for letting us be together. Thank you for letting us be together and worship you. Please get us home safely and bring us back together soon that we may do this again. We love you, Lord, and pray this in the name of Jesus, your Son. Amen.
All right, if you'll stand with us, we'll sing our final hymn of the morning, Onward Christian Soldiers, which will be hymn 132.